So think back to your history class for a second. You remember it, right? Learning about the pyramids, the pharaohs, all that good stuff. But what if I told you that some of the biggest facts you learned were just completely wrong?
That's what we're diving into. We are pulling back the curtain on some of history's absolute biggest lies. We're talking about those stories you think you know inside and out, but where the reality is actually so much more interesting.
First up, let's tackle a classic. It's an image that's been burned into our brains, mostly by Hollywood, the building of the Great Pyramids. I mean, you can picture it now, can't you? Tens of thousands of slaves, dragging massive blocks under the burning sun, getting whipped by cruel overseers.
Yeah, that image has been around forever, thanks to some early historians and, of course, movies. But here's the thing. The actual evidence on the ground tells a totally different story. The whole myth of forced slave labor, it's powerful, but it's just not true. The reality was much more organized. The workforce was actually made up of paid laborers. These were often farmers who worked on the pyramids during the off-season as a way to pay their taxes. It was a system called corvée duty, basically paying your dues with labor instead of cash.
And we're not just guessing here. Archaeologists have found a mountain of proof. They've dug up entire villages that were built just to house these workers. And by studying things like animal bones and thousands of bread jars, they figured out that these workers ate really well. We're talking a high-quality diet, which, when you think about it, makes total sense. You can't build one of the wonders of the ancient world with a starving, exhausted workforce. These people were skilled, valued professionals. So valued, in fact, that we have written records from 1170 BC of an artisan strike. They literally put down their tools because their promised rations hadn't shown up. That's not exactly something slaves could pull off, is it?
All right, so from backbreaking labor to spooky superstitions, let's stick around ancient Egypt for a minute and debunk another huge legend, the terrifying curse of King Tutankhamun's tomb. You know the story. Anyone who dares to disturb the boy king's eternal slumber is doomed.
Now, to be fair, the Egyptians did do curses. They were a real thing. Take a look at this inscription from a totally different tomb. I shall seize his neck like a bird. Yikes! That is pretty intense, right? It was a common way to try and scare off tomb robbers. So the idea of a curse isn't totally out of left field.
But here is the massive plot twist. The single most famous cursed tomb in all of human history had absolutely no curse written on it. Not a word. Not a single warning. So where in the world did this global myth come from?
Well, the myth of a supernatural mummy's curse is just that, a myth. The reality is way less spooky and a lot more about media hype. It all started with one very clever journalist. See, when the expedition's rich funder died a few months after the tomb was opened, a reporter smelled a sensational story and basically invented the idea of a mummy's curse. The press went wild with it, and the story went viral, 1920s style.
So how did the supposed first victim, Lord Carnarvon, actually die? Was it ancient magic? A pharaoh's revenge? Nope. It was a tragically boring chain of events. It all started with a mosquito bite. Then he accidentally nicked the bite while he was shaving. That little cut got infected, and he ended up dying from blood poisoning. No magic, no mummy, just some really bad luck in the limits of medicine back then.
And if you look at the numbers, the whole idea just falls apart. Out of the 58 people who were there when the tomb was opened, only 8 of them died within the next dozen years. And they died from all sorts of normal things. Cancer, accidents, you name it. The vast majority lived long, happy lives. The curse, it turns out, was terrible at its job.
Okay, so ancient Egypt's biggest stories are not what they seem. No slaves building pyramids, no deadly curses, fine. But the Roman Colosseum, surely that was the non-stop brutal bloodbath we all imagine, right? I mean, come on, fights to the death every single time.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's tackle our final big myth, the gladiator death match. This idea had every single fight in that famous arena was a bloody battle to the very end.
And you guessed it, the story we see in the movies is way more dramatic than what really happened. You should think of it less like a public execution and more like a modern professional sport, something like UFC or boxing, just, with swords. Was death a risk? Absolutely. But it was the exception, not the main goal.
And this wasn't just 2 guys with a sword and a shield over and over again. Oh no, the Romans demanded variety in their entertainment. Historians have identified around 30, that's right, 30 different types of gladiators. Each one had unique weapons, unique armor, and a unique fighting style. You had guys with tridents and nets. You even had, and get this, condemned criminals who were forced to fight completely blindfolded. That was the entertainment.
So why wasn't it always a fight to the death? Well, it pretty much boils down to money. These gladiators were highly trained athletes. They were expensive investments. Their owners wanted them to live so they could fight another day and make more money. They even had referees, often retired gladiators, who enforced the rules and could actually stop a fight. And while some were slaves fighting for a chance at freedom, many were professionals, fighting for fame, for fortune, and for the glory of the fight itself. The goal was the thrill of the contest, not just a guaranteed body count.
So let's just recap. The people who built the pyramids were paid professionals, King Tut's curse was basically fake news, and gladiators were more like pro athletes than condemned murderers. It turns out history is often a lot messier and, frankly, a lot more interesting than the simple stories we're told. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If these huge foundational stories are wrong, what other history have we all been taking for granted?